I discovered David Subar as a source of engineering leadership insight when I heard him talk with the UK's CTO Craft Bytes group on, he was talking on modes of CTO success and failure. And his talk just really resonated with me more than about any talk I'd heard in a really long time, because he, one, he really gets agile, and boy, there are a ton of people out there who don't. He gets the importance of context, of the why, of engineers, of motivation for engineers. He called out empathy for users, which is dear to my heart, having managed the UX of the Macintosh. He recommended demoing frequently in order to keep the executives out of your team room. He advised the socializing of ideas and of roadmaps to get executives on board. He counseled not doing everything, but asking, what are the things that only I can do? And not doing all the things that anybody else can do. And I investigated a little bit and discovered he's on the board of the LA CTO Forum. I discovered his gigs have included Disney and Lynda.com and Frog Design and a ton of startups. I discovered that he was not only acts as a CTO, but a CPO, a Chief Product Officer. And then I discovered that he had done a podcast with one of our sponsors, the CTO Connection, a talk called "Improving Communication Between CEOs and CTOs," and I'll paste the URL into the chat in a moment. But with that, let me turn it over to David. David, it's all yours.
Thanks, Ron. I'm gonna have to have you introduce me everywhere I go. So, good evening, everyone, and thanks for spending time with me. So I'm talking about product and engineering culture tonight. And my argument is that the culture of the product management team and the engineering team are critical for those teams to be effective. And so we're going to talk about some of the attributes and how to make them effective. Now, Ron already sang some of my praises, so I won't go too far in depth, but I'm going to tell you about how I got here and why I got to thinking about product management engineering together as a group and about culture. So as I started my career doing research and development in AI and machine learning at a military-owned think tank in DC. And it sounds pretty cool, but it wasn't. What I found was my job was we're advancing science somewhat, and we would write a paper. And if it was a good paper, we'd present it at a conference and maybe 200 people would listen to it, and then nothing would happen. And I found it really frustrating. And I was, I'm congenitally a nerd. I was born a nerd, and I was programming computers when I was 12. A lot of you people have the same story that I have, but I wanted to do something. My uncle was a physicist, but I wanted to do something with technology and have an impact on the world. And so I moved from doing research and development to being a programmer at an AI tools firm, then managing teams and being a director, being CTO, and I was almost where I wanted to get. But as Ron mentioned, I became CPO as well because I wanted to be able to shape what was happening to build something that mattered. And so my career went from being a developer and developing software to developing teams at developing software, kind of getting very meta. And so I did that. I was CTO and Chief Product Officer of a bunch of different companies. And in that, I learned kind of methodologies, what worked and what didn't work about building product management teams and engineering teams. So 7 years ago, I started Interna, and it was in Interna, we just help companies with product management technology teams and make them more effective. And so because this, as Ron mentioned, companies like the Walt Disney Company and Lynda.com and Frog and Frog that Ron mentioned, but like a bunch of startups that you might not have heard of and companies you might have heard of. But the point here is that there are similar things that happen to cultures for product management and engineering and technology companies that are the same no matter the size of the companies. There's some things that are different, but some things that are the same. And so tonight I'm going to talk about some of those things, and hopefully they're things that you can use. So my argument is that there's 6 attributes you need to make an effective culture for product management engineering. And I'm going to talk about them. Alignment, measurement, review of what you're doing, having a great team to do it, empowering the team and the environment for them to be successful. The most important thing for alignment is for the CTO and the chief product officer themselves to be aligned. Now, in this conversation, I'm going to talk about whoever runs product as a CPO, whether that be the chief product officer, or the VP of product, or the SVP of product. I'm going to talk about that person as CPO, and same with running engineering, the chief technology officer. So I'm not talking about this person who runs technology as a CTO, although they might be a VP or an SVP. And I'm arguing there's 3 states of this alignment between the chief product officer and the chief technology officer. And once again, it's critical. If those 2 people are not aligned, it's very unlikely their teams are going to be aligned. So the first thing is about thinking about optimizing your team. Now, a lot of people come to running their team and think about their primary job is optimizing their team's efficiency. There's an input, there's stuff that we do, and then there's an output. That input might be, hey, we have some strategy, and from there we write, we have a roadmap, we write a bunch of user stories, and the output is the user stories, and the engineers get that. Or, hey, we get some user stories, and then we write a bunch of code, and we put it on servers. That's our input, our process, and our output. And so a lot of people think about how to optimize their team's efficiency going through this. Hey, I'm going to build a bunch of infrastructure so I can release code quickly. I'm going to build an architecture that aligns with our 3-year vision of what we're going to build so we can build quickly on top of that, as an example. And my argument is, if the primary thing that you're looking at is the efficiency of your team, it's the surest way to fail, particularly around culture for product management and engineering. And the reason for this is because when you're thinking inward on your team, your inputs, your process, and your outputs, it creates essentially a wall. And when something bad happens, and something bad surely will happen, you're not looking at the holistic picture. Hey, something got shipped late. Well, we in product wrote the user stories. We gave them to engineering. If it's late, it's on them. Or, we did what product management told us to do. The user stories weren't really clear, and so it was hard to know. So if we're late, it's on them. Or the product went out there and the users didn't like it. Well, we did what the product managers told us. That's not our fault. And the problem is when something goes wrong, this sets up a cancer in the organization where product management and engineering start pointing fingers at each other. And this creates the opposite of a good culture, right? This creates an opportunity for people to look where the problem existed somewhere else.
Dave, you're going to give me nightmares tonight. I'm sorry.
That's all right. It's all right. I'm going to get you out of it.
I'm looking forward to it, man.
So the next reasonable solution is product management and engineering to bond together and say, our job is to ship a product. And that's much, much better, right? Because now, and this, by the way, I think this is a next good solution where they say, our job is to ship a product, and product management might have an opinion about the way things should be built because they have some insight to it. And engineering might be able to say things like, hey, can we build this? Or product management, I understand what you're asking me to do. That's going to take a really long time. I can get 80% of it done in 20% of the time if we just do this instead. And now you have a bonding between product management and engineering, and that's better. But it's not right still. Because what you've done now is shifted the goalposts from between product management engineering to outside. And oftentimes you'll hear language like, well, we have to talk to business about what they want. We have to we got to go tell someone else, or we just do what sales tells us to do. This is something that I see a lot, is people will say, this whole company is really run by sales, and we just do whatever we're told. This product management engineering is something that's better, but still not what you want. The optimal thing to do is align product management and engineering with the customer. And this is what Ron was mentioning before that I'm very passionate about, is having empathy for the customer and getting that alignment. And this solves a bunch of problems I'm about to explain. But the first question is, who's the customer? Is it marketing? Is it sales? There's this concept of, is our customers someone internal? And my argument is those people are not the customer. The customer, your customer is actually the customer of the company. And it's only with that alignment that you can create an environment that's going to be successful for a culture that's going to be successful in product management engineering. And here's why. Here's why. You need not only alignment between product management engineering, you need alignment within the company. And what we know about companies is that your job in the company is to create enterprise value. And you create enterprise value by having revenue and having profitability. And that's all true. But I argue revenue and profitability is a side effect of something more important, which is creating value for your customer. If you do something for your customer that creates value, they will tend to buy from you. It's not the only thing you have to do, but it is a necessary and a critical thing you have to do, is create products that have value for customers. And when you do that, you will generate revenue and profitability as a side effect. Now you're solving not just the customer's problem, you're solving the CEO's problem. And you're getting aligned. Product management and engineering get alignment with the company. And now you're not hey, we respond to what sales says. Now you are solving the problem that the company has by solving the problem that the company's customers have. And this is one of the critical components of the culture, is understanding who you should be aligned to. Now, how do you know? How do you know if you creating value for the customer? And I say, look at the activities that you're running. If the majority of the activities are not rooted in direct change for your users, you're not concentrated on creating customer value. Not everything. Yes, by the way, you do need to do things that create your own efficiency. Create CI/CD systems, for instance. But the majority of the stuff you need to do is about creating customer value. Then you should measure whether your team did or didn't create customer value. We're going to talk about how to do that. And the members of the team need to know why it is what they're doing. How are they aligned to the customer? How is what they're doing create customer value? Why is it important? So we talked about alignment, and we're going to talk about it again. But alignment to customers only has value if you can measure whether you're actually creating value. Just saying, hey, we're here to create customer value, we're going to do a bunch of stuff. If you don't have a way of measuring it, it's not that interesting. So I want to take a break for a second of my talking. And I'm going to ask everyone to simultaneously chat of what metrics do you use in your teams. What metrics do you report? Actually, what metrics do you report from your teams to the people you report to the CEO? So if everyone can go in the chat just for a moment. So there's a bunch of them here, and I'm going to reference a few of them: churn, velocity, bugs fixed, NPS. And here's my argument. CTOs often communicate things like velocity or cycle time or PR response time. And chief product officers often talk about bugs or user stories or roadmaps. And those are interesting metrics, but those are interesting metrics that are internal to the department. And if you want alignment, if you want something that you can measure to know if you have alignment to customers, you need a different metric set. These metrics are good and you should use them. You should use them to manage your department. But you need to think about what it is you're putting on the roadmap and the value that that's going to create. So my argument is everything that is on the roadmap is there as a bet. You only have so many bets you can do simultaneously. So let's just say you have 50 developers and you have a 6-month roadmap. So you essentially have 300 developer months that you can spend. That's essentially 300 small bets you can make. Every bet should have a reason. Every epic you put on the roadmap should have a reason. So my argument is that things like talking about velocity, not interesting when you're thinking about alignment. Interesting for your department, for managing your department internally. But if you want to align to customers, you need to have a statement about how are you going to generate value for them. And so here's a structure that you can do that with. We believe by doing this feature for this user, we're going to achieve this outcome for them. And we will know it when we see this metric move. And that every feature on the roadmap needs to have a statement like this. It doesn't have to have exactly this format, but you need to have a thesis about why you're making this bet. So why is that? How does that affect culture? Why do you care? Every person that works in your department is like a vector. Now, I don't know how many of you guys remember linear algebra. Vectors have 2 attributes, magnitude and direction. Magnitude is like, this person's a really good developer, a really good product manager, and he can get a lot out. Direction is, which way are they going? If you have a bunch of people that work for you that are really good, but going in opposite directions, the sum of your vectors is going to be 0. You're going to have a lot of effort expended and not a lot of outcome. You're not going to be creating a lot of value. If, on the other hand, people know why they're doing something and what bet they're trying to fulfill, the vectors will tend to align. And when they align, the sum of the vectors will be value creation for the customers. Value creation for the customers means they're more likely to buy a product for you, revenue being a side effect. If that revenue is done at a unit margin, with unit margin, you're going to generate profit. Profit, sum of all profit over time creates corporate value. Great, that's a win. And so having these bets aligns your vectors, aligns your people to produce value. It produces empathy. We can have a whole different conversation, glad to have it someday, about how do you organize your squads if you use a squad model, and how you organize your squads, which I argue to organize squads for particular customers and not for features, but for products, because it creates an empathy. But if you do that and people know why they're doing things, then they'll tend to align and you'll tend to increase value better. Okay, so we talked about alignment. We talked about measurement. So great. We know what we're going to do. We're aligning to customers. We know what we're going to provide for them because we've stated it specifically. Not enough. Not enough to create the culture we want.
I'll just throw out a comment if you don't mind.
Please.
What I've seen is top management puts out statements of why, but because they address so many different corporate departments, they're almost forced to make it such a broad umbrella that this vague statement of how we're going to help the customer is not really boots on the ground for the people in the trenches. And you're sort of dependent on the intermediate layers of management to say, hey, given this broad statement from up high, for us it means this, da 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 da. And I so rarely see this refining of the vague broad statement into this is what it means for engineers, this is what it means for manufacturing, this is what it means for service, and so on. I rarely see that. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I support your thesis. I just see it so hard to be implemented in a tractable manner.
So, okay, let me tell you. So this wasn't one of my, so that's a good question. It's not one of my slides, but let's talk about this because what you're saying is a real thing. And if you're a believer in OKRs, for instance, that's a method to do this, but it's also very rarely executed well, right? It's the same problem. There's some broad statement, but what does it mean? And so there is a whole process from product management to talk about how are we going to think about creating value? Now, the epic statements are part of that, right? But the product manager's job, the product management's department's job is to say, okay, we're going to place some bets in order to create this value and to draw in information, data from various departments to do it, right? So going from that broad, the CEO or the board has this general statement to the implementation to say, okay, we've got 10 choices of what to do this quarter. We can only do 3. Here are the ones we're going to pick and here's why. And so that's part of the product management. That is a whole nother presentation, which I'm willing to give at some point. But it's a product manager's job to do it. And there's some nuance there in how that gets done, right? Because it's not just drawing ideas in from other departments, but then it's organizing those ideas into ones that will create the most value for relative cost, and then socializing that within product management engineering and among the various departments so you can get alignment. So you can go back to the CEO and say, we had a choice of bets to make. There were 10 we considered. We chose to do this, and here's why. And that's where the epic statements then become helpful again. And so some of this is science. A lot of this is just interpersonal interaction and software, but it is incumbent and it's responsibility of product management to be able to do that refinement of here's a broad vision to here's how we're going to do value creation. And if a product management organization can't or won't do that, you kind of got a problem. Now, there are some, I've been in companies where the CEO in particular has 1,000 good ideas. And it's disruptive to the product management process. I was in one organization where the CEO was brilliant. He was brilliant. And he came to me one day with like, okay, here's 4 more things we need to do. And I said to him, Keith, and by the way, his name was actually Keith. I'm not changing the name to protect the innocent. He was not at all innocent at all. I said, Keith, those 4 things, those 4 things are, 4 of your 16 brilliant ideas this week. And they were really, really smart. And they were. Keith was brilliant. Help me think about, among the things that we can do, how do these rank? And I'm describing this conversation as if it happened in a 2-minute session. It wasn't. It was longer than that. It was more nuanced than that. But it's product management's job is to do that refinement that you're mentioning and do it. And it's part art and it's part science. Anyway, not meant to be the topic for this presentation, but interesting aside. Let's go to the point that you have the epics on the roadmap. It's not sufficient, right? So now we're aligned. We're aligned in product management engineering to the customer. We know what we're going to do. Now, people understand how to retro sprints, and some people are quite good at it. The end of sprints, we go and we look and we say, hey, we thought we were going to get this much velocity, taking care of these many points. We got more done than that. Hooray. What did we learn? How we're going to do it again? We got less done. Oh, that's sad. What did we learn? What are we going to change in the future? People know how to do that. Kanban, there's similar things about looking at WIP and things like that. Those are good. Those are important. Those are necessary. But it's just as necessary to retro your epics after they're done. And you don't retro your epics the day you do the release. You need some time for the users to use the product. But you made a bet. You need to know whether your bet paid off or not. And so you need to take you need to take the epics and the epic statements. You should take the epics and the epic statements and say, how did we do? Some of them you're going to get right, and some of them you're going to get wrong. That's okay. As a matter of fact, if you get none of them wrong, you've probably been too conservative. You should hope to get some of them wrong. But then you should ask how you do, and you should share the conversation with the engineers, right? Because now we're talking about engineering and product culture. And so if you're telling the engineers and your product that this stuff's important, then they should be part of the retro process. They should hear how you did, because by the way, you want them to be empathetic to the customers. It's hard to be empathetic if you didn't know if you helped or not. And so retroing the epics is as important as retroing the sprints.
So David, what happens if some of those engineers, the epics they worked on were the ones that didn't benefit, the value didn't pan out, the bet didn't play out?
Well, that's going to happen. Like that is certainly going to happen. Is some of them, the things that you worked on were not successful. That should be an expectation. The thing that they're bonding to isn't the epic they worked on, or you hope it's not. It might be. It's the value they're creating for the customer. And so there's a bunch of things in the world that need to be refactored. Code, features, or design. You should expect that some of these things aren't going to work, but they're experiments you're going to put out there. Like, once again, another aside, I'm a big believer in doing MVP. All product managers are bad at their job. Every one of them. The reason they're bad at their job is because you can't be good at description of the job that product managers are given. Tell me exactly what the users want. And so our expectation should be that some of these are going to be wrong, and we're going to learn from them. And our expectation, therefore, is because we know some of them are going to be wrong, we should invest as little as we can into good software. Oh, sorry, let me say that wrong. Let me say that differently. All the software we build should be good software, but we should build the smallest increment of it so we can learn, so we don't have to overinvest in something that might be wrong. So engineer, think about what you're doing that way. Don't fall in love with your code, expect to refactor it, because the environment that you're in, the bets that we're making might be wrong. But our goal here is to create more value for the customer. So even if this thing that we just released wasn't right, some of them are, and you're part of that journey. Is that helpful, Ron? Okay. So we talk about alignment, aligning the teams to customers, measurement, review. That's awesome. But none of this works unless you have great people. So how does this stuff help me get a great team? As a manager of a team or a director or a CTO or chief product officer, if you do 3 things well, 90% of your problems go away. If you recruit well, retain well, and fire well. I'm not going to talk about fire well right now. Talk about recruit well and retain well. Now, product managers and engineers have choices of jobs. They can leave your company today and get a job in like 3 days. And by the way, if they can't do that, you probably don't want them to work for you either. But you have to assume that they can get another job 3 days. That makes retention really hard. Recruiting is also really hard for exactly the same reason. So you have to have a differentiator to keep great people on your staff. And the typical ones that people think about are money or stock options or interesting projects. And I argue that none of these are sustainable. Facebook can pay more money than any of us in any of our companies, unless you happen to work at Facebook or Google or Amazon. Money's not a differentiator. Options are hard because if you have a down quarter, it's hard. There's a lot of interesting projects. The key differentiator I'm arguing, sorry, went ahead. The key differentiator is having the value, creating value for customers and being able to say, hey, mom, look what we did. Here's how we changed the world. That is non-fungible. Like people talk about non-fungible tokens. Money's fungible. Your dollar bill and my dollar bill, exactly the same. The differentiator for your company, for your product, the thing that you can do to be more attractive, to retain, to generate, to attract great engineers and great product managers, to retain them, is have them working on something that's of importance and have them tied to it. That's where the empathy, it becomes not just important to creating a great product, but to having a great team. Okay. By the way, there's a whole, I've already mentioned like 2 or 3 other presentations. There's a whole nother one on how to recruit and retain people and particularly on recruiting, how to think about them, how to align them with what attributes you're going to look for, not for today. So, okay, we have teams that are aligned to customers. We have things we're going to do to measure to do them. We're going to review them. We've got a way to attract people and retain them. Not enough, because if you micromanage them, they will tend to leave. By the way, there's a 2x2 matrix that looks like you have 2 choices of the kind of people you can hire, smart ones or stupid ones. And then you could empower them or micromanage them. That's 4 quadrants. Hiring stupid people and micromanaging them takes too much time, too costly. That's a fail. Hiring stupid people and empowering them, bad outcome, fail. Hiring smart people, micromanaging them, they'll tend to leave, fail. There's only 1 quadrant that works. Hiring smart people and empowering them. Now I'm going to talk about this briefly. There's, I think Ron, you saw my commander's intent presentation. Did you? Yeah. I'm going to talk about it briefly here. It's a longer, it's 45 minutes, which I'll reference here. But a commander's intent is basically this. It talks about and it was invented by the Prussians, and then Napoleon did it in other military. It started with the military, but the problem they needed to solve was, I have large number of people in an army. Communication is unclear and maybe slow, and I want them to go and achieve some purpose. Turns out that works that those attributes are very much the same in technology development. And where there's a large, complicated things to do, it's not clear how to do them, and the communication is hard. And so the answer to that, and I'm doing this in brief, is the manager says, here's what our goal set is. We're trying to get this done for this customer, very much using the EPIC. So drawing down to here's who we serve and here's how. Ask me a bunch of questions about how to do it. Team asks questions, you finalize the goal, you finalize the EPIC statement, and then the manager says to the team, I'm not going to tell you how to do this. Your job is, I'm not going to tell you how to do your job. I want you to go away and figure out how you're going to solve this problem and bring me back the solution. And then the manager goes and asks a bunch of hard questions to the people that are going to execute it. Now, it's important here that the manager asks and not tells. If you tell someone who works for you how to do something, they will tend to do it, even if it's wrong. If you ask them, you will learn. Maybe they know something you didn't know. They're closer to the problem. Maybe you didn't communicate it well. And by learning, you will be able to harden against the problem. And then so just as you've decided the goal, now you've jointly decided on the implementation. Let them do it. That's not all you do in Commander's intent. So now they know your intent, they know the implication. Then your job as a manager is to get impediments out of their way so they can execute, and then just check in with them. That's Commander's intent, standing on one foot.
I love the title of this, empowerment, which is really saying, admitting that, not subtly saying, I don't know everything. What do you know? Getting people, right. Encouraging them to grow. It's actually just very great. Empowerment is great. Tell me something. Tell me something. And you don't have to be nakedly saying, I don't know this. I actually have had in the past, I've told people, you're closer to the solution than I am. Tell me something. And that's a way of empowerment, saying you're closer than I am, admitting that I'm not the person doing the day-to-day work. I think it's very good.
Yeah. So there's this story about Abbottabad and bin Laden. They were going after bin Laden. And I think it was General McRaven. I might have picked the wrong general here. Went to the SEAL team and said, we think we found Obama. We think we found bin Laden. Sorry, apologies. We think we found bin Laden. And here's a model of where we think he lives. And the SEALs, there's an article in the Atlantic about this. The SEALs all walked around and looked at the model. And then McRaven said, okay, I'm leaving the room now. I'm going to come back in an hour or so. Tell me what you need to successfully capture or kill bin Laden. And then he walked out of the room. That is classic Commander's intent. Now, think what you want about that mission, about bin Laden, however you feel about it. But that was classic good management, because the people whose job was to do it, who knew the job better, they made the decisions. They not only bought into the solution because they crafted it, they crafted a better solution than McRaven could have crafted himself. Okay, so now we've got product management team aligned to each other, aligned to the customer, not to each other. They are going to measure, they know what they're going to do. They have some way of measuring it. They're going to review the measure so they can tune the product management process. They've got a great team of people to do it. They're empowered to do it so they can execute. They're aligned because they know how to do it. All that's great. You need one more thing, and you need an environment where they can be successful. The environment's your responsibility. To create a great culture, the environment is your responsibility. You need to be in a space where the team can get what they need. I talk about it here about the company growing or can grow. You need the tools, the money to give the team what they need. You have to be able to lead the team, right? You have to believe in what the mission is and who you serve. If you don't believe who you're serving, your team won't believe it either. You yourself have to be empowered. And it might mean that you have to fight for empowerment to lead the team, but you yourself have to be empowered to create this environment for them. You have to be able to provide the tools and see the table. Now, when I talk about providing the team the tools, I mean it sometimes in a complicated fashion, like, hey, I'm going to get you all the credits you need at AWS, and you want to use Lambda, that's awesome, or pick Azure if you want, whatever. But the tools also mean, back when people worked in offices, hey, everyone's here is working late. Who's hungry? I'll order the pizza. Oh, the garbage cans are full because the pizza boxes are filled up. I'll empty the garbage cans. You need to do those kind of things. Like, your job is to create an environment where your team can be successful. It's not enough for them to be empowered and aligned. They have to have the tools, and you've got to provide that environment. My suggestion is try to get as many of these right as you can. And the more you get, the better your culture is going to become. Right? The thesis is create a great culture for product management engineering. You're going to get a more effective product management engineering team. Get as close to perfection as you can get. You might be, by the way, there may be some environments that you're in where you can't be effective, where you don't have a seat at the table, and maybe you should decide to quit those companies. So I'll leave you with a quote. Now, you'll see that my French is awful, or actually non-existent, but Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, he also wrote The Little Prince. So he had this quote about love isn't two people gazing at each other, but gazing outward in the same direction. I think that's true, but it's not only true for people in love with each other. It's true for teams that want to function well together. This whole presentation I gave could have been summed up by this one slide. Go find the customer you serve. Figure out what makes that customer happy. Have everyone aligned to it, and the culture will tend to end well. So that's what I have for you. If anyone has questions for me, wants to talk offline, feel free to reach out to me by email. You can hit me up on LinkedIn. You can hit the internal website. Glad to chat about some of the things that we think about when we coach CTOs and chief product. I missed this in the beginning. There's 4 things we do. Sorry, I'll just say this quickly in case. One is we evaluate product management engineering teams and say things like, here's some stuff you could do better. Here's how, and here's some stuff you should keep doing. We coach and mentor CTOs and chief product officers, and we function as interim CTOs and chief product officers when a company doesn't have someone, help fix the teams ourselves. If you want to ever have a conversation about, hey, I'm seeing some stuff like this, what have you guys seen? And just spend an hour on the phone with me or with one of the folks, just call us. Glad to be helpful.